This is my reflective video for option 1, working with artifacts. Now, we were asked to start off with some planning for this assignment. So basically my attempt, or what I followed through, was I collected and collated all of the work that I'd been assigned to do in the previous assignments. Things like research, colour palettes and techniques, extracting this information from working with artefacts from local history, personal archive and so forth. The planning did teach me a lot, and I felt as though the planning was in conjunction with refining and sorting and selecting of my ideas, which really allowed me to reduce things down, play with more ideas, write it down, select what I was going to use, what I wasn't going to use, and build up positive and negative connotations. So bullet pointing and brainstorming worked really well. But one thing that I did learn, that the planning did change as I started to investigate further into the assignment. So I didn't really pinpoint anything that I was going to target direct at the beginning of the assignment. Now, I'd already worked with the material, paper, and the idea was still strong to make a continuation with making paper fabric. I found that I could use various techniques. I could manipulate the paper, I could paint, I could texturise, and also as well, one of the main things was the paper was sustainable. I managed to get large scale pieces of paper from packaging from work, and I started to recycle paper at home by covering it in paint and distorting it and so forth, stitching it together by hand or machine. So this played quite a major role because I'd actually decided to go very large scale, and just to give you an idea, as big as a door. A lot of the work is demonstrated in my blog. I paid particular attention with the blog to try and make it as detailed and in-depth as possible. And I think one of the reasons behind this is because everything is now digital submission. So I'm finding it very difficult at the moment, because it would actually be nice for my tutor to see the paper samples, to be able to touch them, to feel the expression of my work, but unfortunately we can't do that. So a big proportion has now become video and photography, which in actual fact I did record some of the sampling and turned that also into paper fabrics. Now, during the planning, I decided on my colour palette, and I'd also decided on which artists' contemporary art, that what direction it was going to flow. I came across a new artist called Deborah, which was nice to look at her work because it was a lot of mark making and texture, so this was a reference for that. Joshua Blakewell continues to be inspired in my work, especially towards the end of the assignment with masks and also the texturising of the paper. I felt that this was working really well, and I've learned that paper is obviously very sustainable, recyclable, but also a good material to actually use a variety and various techniques, which I still think that I could really push this further, possibly in other areas of my practice. So making final decisions in the planning, there was actually a good core structure to the work. Now, interesting, as I'd slightly raced ahead to messages and meanings, and there was starting to develop a connection. The academic essay was a total disaster, created a lot of problems for me personally, and this had been under discussion with my tutor. And since all of this has arisen, I've actually been diagnosed as dyslexic. I went for my dyslexia test a few weeks ago, and I have now started to introduce this into messages and meanings, which kind of finalised in the next project. My initial intention with the large-scale samples was to show an array of creativity, serious, playful, and a sense of maturity to the work. But my aim was to then translate the paper fabrics for the purpose of messages and meaning, and the concept was based around dyslexia. At the time, I'd kind of invented a little bit of a character called the Textile Warrior, because I'd become very despondent with feeling what I call stupid at writing, especially the academic essay. I've never found writing particularly easy, but one thing that I did learn at the dyslexia test, in actual fact, it's just a difficulty with language. So this assignment kind of turned everything around for me. So my demonstration is how to be a creative dyslexic. The Textile Warrior was introduced, and he's going to finally fight against the fears of academic writing. And one of the main things that I did extract for messages and meanings, which will be demonstrated, were my old school reports, which demonstrates clearly that there has been a continued issue with my difficulty with language. So, going back to the large scale sampling, I just basically went with the flow. I went with my gut instinct with mark making, texturising paper. It was good to have a strong colour palette to stick to in this assignment, and that was inspired early on at the beginning from Keita Jackson and her woven copper and green artifact vessels. So I just felt that it was just a fantastic colour palette to work with, and it inspired me to continue further. So extracting pieces of information from the planning, there were then drawings started to evolve, and I used from my own personal archive in my own imagery of my face, and then through a process of drawing I distorted some of these images in connection with dyslexia, of how it could possibly make me feel. So there was a little bit of a negative connotation there, but then what grew from that was the idea of continuing with the mask context, of possibly targeting these paper fabrics to make a three-dimensional structure. And Joshua Blakewell inspired again this, because he demonstrates some of his artwork by basically just placing that over a human head. So I will discuss it in messages and meanings a little bit further, but this was part of what I was extracting and pulling and isolating work for ideas, and I think it's kind of quite difficult to get the message across that all the planning is up here. All I need to do is demonstrate it and get it down on paper, which I think I successfully do and have done, and this is going to be demonstrated in a video of my sketchbook, but I have also given evidence in the blog for this. Other areas that had started to evolve and we were asked to consider were things like composition, exploring colour slightly further, which I did do. This again, I didn't isolate the colour palette from Keita Jackson, but I'd noticed that the idea of using school reports and the notion of school ink with bleach to actually write words started to fall in to the colour palette, so that became very expressive. So there were kind of two areas of colour palette that worked really well together, and with the composition of ideas of composition